Mr. Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, it's just over 2 years to the day almost since the Rwanda scheme was first announced from that dispatch box. So it would be remiss of us not to take stock of progress to date. Well, hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money have been sent to the Rwandan government. Civil servants, courts, parliamentarians and journalists have spent countless hours, days and weeks discussing and writing about it. And not one, not two, but 3 Home Secretaries have been flown down to Kigali. But apart from that, I have to say there's not a great deal to report, Madam Deputy Speaker. The boats have kept coming, the backlog has kept growing, and the people smugglers are still laughing all the way to the bank. 2 years of headline-chasing gimmicks. 2 years of pursuing a policy that is fundamentally unworkable, unaffordable and unlawful. 2 years of flogging this dead horse. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am an inveterate optimist, so I truly believe that one day the benches opposite will come to understand that hard graft and common sense are always more effective than the sugar rush of a tabloid front page. And they will come to accept that they should have adopted Labour's comprehensive plan to restore order to our border by redirecting the vast amounts of money set aside for the Rwandan government into a new cross-border police unit and a new security partnership with Europol to smash the criminal gangs upstream. Analysis conducted by the National Audit Office has revealed that if the government manages to send 300 asylum seekers to Rwanda, which is just 0.5% of the 60,000 people currently earmarked for the scheme, then it will cost the British taxpayer a truly staggering £2 million per person. Now, it is crystal clear that the scheme is doomed to fail on its own terms because people who are prepared to risk life and limb crossing continents are not going to be deterred by a 0.5% chance of being sent to Rwanda. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the mind-boggling costs of the scheme are quite difficult to grasp. So I've done a bit of homework, a bit of research into what else you could get for £2 million. Now, my honourable friend, the member for Bermondsey, who's not in his place this evening, got the ball rolling on this one by pointing out that during our last debate on this bill, the £2 million will get you 5 trips to outer space on the Virgin Galactic spacecraft. But I've calculated, Madam Deputy Speaker, you look impressed, and suitably so. But I've calculated that you can live for 3 decades on one of the world's most expensive cruise liners. You could charter the Lady M yacht for a year. That is, of course, the yacht that belongs to the noble Baroness Mones. It's her vessel of choice, as some of those on the opposite benches may be aware. Or you could even fly the Prime Minister's favourite helicopter to Australia and back. And speaking of the Prime Minister, I noticed that during the Easter recess, he found time to offer his services as a financial advisor to small businesses via Zoom. Well, I don't know about you, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I have to say I do have some concerns that the guy who's happy to pump billions of pounds into a failing fiasco like this Rwanda scheme is offering his services as a financial advisor to unsuspecting members of the public. Let's hope the Financial Conduct Authority will intervene as a matter of urgency. I will take an intervention.
Very grateful to the honourable gentleman. He's proving to be most entertaining. But as this is consideration of Lord's amendment, is he going to actually get on to deal with the amendments?
Which one?
I want him to be in order.
Order! If the honourable gentleman was not in order, I would not have allowed him to speak. He has been drawing some very interesting facts to the attention of the House. And I, for one, am likely to explore some of them, but not the yachts. Mr. Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I always enjoy taking interventions from a fellow Welshman, but I do feel he was well and truly put into his place by that particular riposte from Madam Deputy Speaker.
From a non-fellow Scotsman.
I will take an intervention.
I'm grateful to him. I'm sure that he, like me, will have marvelled at the government's ability to legislate for Rwanda to be a safe country. And this, of course, is in respect of Lord's Amendment 2, Madam Deputy Speaker. So will my honourable friend join me in urging the government to use this amazing power that it has to legislate that CO2 emissions will no longer cause global warming and that sugar, fat and alcohol will no longer damage human health?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I'm sure the benches opposite would be delighted to oblige, and perhaps we could also legislate that the sky is green and the grass is blue, or perhaps that the Welsh rugby team actually won the last Six Nations. I would love to pass a law to secure that objective. Turning now to the amendments that are before us today. Let's be clear, not one of these amendments prevents flights from Rwanda taking off. On the contrary, they simply seek to place on the face of the bill what ministers have previously promised, namely that the bill is lawful, that the government will protect the most vulnerable, and that we will stand by those brave Afghans who have supported military efforts. Addressing each amendment directly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to first focus on Lord's Amendment 10B in the name of the noble Lord Brown. Now, we have spoken a lot about the unworkability and the unaffordability of this policy. But we should also talk about the unethical and frankly un-British nature of deporting Afghans who have supported Britain's defence and diplomatic efforts halfway across the world to Rwanda. Yeah. That is not Operation Warm Welcome, Madam Deputy Speaker. That is Operation Cold Shoulder. And we should have seen it coming, given the Prime Minister halted flights from neighbouring Pakistan for an entire year for Afghans who had already been granted resettlement rights in the UK under ARAP, and only restarted them when the Pakistani government threatened to send those Afghans back across the border to meet their fate in the hands of the Taliban. We owe a debt of honour to the loyal to Britain Afghans who put their lives on the line. And of course, our moral duty is most strongly felt by British Armed Forces personnel who worked alongside them. In fact, this weekend, 13 senior military figures signed a letter to the Sunday Telegraph warning that any brave men and women who have fought alongside our armed forces or served the UK government overseas must be exempt from removal to Rwanda. The signatories included former chiefs of defence staff, as well as a former Secretary-General of NATO and a former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe. They warn that if this exemption is not granted, it will do grave damage, I quote, do grave damage to our ability to recruit local allies in future military operations. And they explain, and I quote again, that they have seen firsthand the enormous courage and dedication shown by those who have fought alongside our armed forces and served British interests abroad, often at huge personal risk. And we take personally Britain's obligation to honour the debt we owe to that cohort. Powerful words indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yep. And I would therefore urge the benches opposite to join us in supporting Lord's Amendment 10B this evening, which seeks to prevent this travesty.
Kevin Foster.
Minister for giving way. The key issue, as he and I will know, is not about Arab people coming via small boats, but unbunging the resettlement programme. In that sense, and given the remarks he's just made, how many spaces does he envisage ensuring are available for resettlement under that scheme?
Well, we know that a number of those who served the British defence, development and diplomatic efforts have been identified for resettlement. So what I would say to him is that those people should be being resettled in the United Kingdom. Let's get that bit of this scheme unblocked before we get into speculation about the quantum, because the key point here is they have already been accepted into the resettlement programmes, but they are being left high and dry in Pakistan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend was accused of levity earlier, but this House has so many things to discuss. There are good policies and sensible, workable policies to deal with unchecked migration. He knows that, I know that. But this, the Rwanda scheme, reminds me, and he's probably too young to remember, the Monty Python Dead Parrot sketch. This scheme is a dead parrot, and the sooner this government wakes up that it's dead, the better.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that point, and he is right that there are so many practical, pragmatic and sensible measures that could be taken to deal with the crisis in the Channel, the Tory small boats chaos. But instead of focusing on those sensible, pragmatic measures, we are dealing with this white elephant of a programme that is never going to get anywhere and is costing millions of pounds of taxpayers' money and absorbing huge amounts of our time. I agree with him absolutely on that. Now, Lord's Amendment 9B, in the name of the noble Baroness Butler-Sloss, is also based on a moral imperative, as it would prevent the removal of potential victims of modern slavery to Rwanda until the individual's process under the national referral mechanism is complete. Now, it should go without saying that modern slavery victims should not be being sent to Rwanda, and we are disappointed that the government's amendment in lieu on this one is a profoundly unserious attempt to reassure the House, not least because we've been here before, and we know that these promised reports are rarely worth the paper they're written on. We on these benches are also deeply concerned about unaccompanied children being inadvertently sent to Rwanda. We therefore support the noble Baroness Lister's Lord's Amendment 7B, which recognises the government's reasoning for rejecting her previous amendment, by this time proposing that an age-disputed person who is appealing their decision can only be removed to Rwanda if a local authority has agreed and stated that this person is not a child. Now, the other Lord's amendments all relate to the rule of law, and we support all of these amendments, which simply articulate principles with which ministers have said from that dispatch box that they agree. The simple question is, Madam Deputy Speaker, if ministers believe that Rwanda is a safe country, then why is the government refusing to support these amendments? They say that this bill abides by international law, so why not just make that clear on the face of the bill? They say that Rwanda is capable of meeting its obligations under international law. So let's see the evidence and let's agree a trust but verify mechanism as set out in these amendments.
I thank my friend for giving way. Would he agree that this bill is not only just inhumane, costly and unworkable, but despite the best efforts to amend the bill, the legislation, the Tories seem resolute in pursuing it rather than getting to grips with our broken asylum system? Just another indication to the country that this government is unfit to govern.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I think there's a very clear choice between the common sense and hard graft and positive international cooperation that is set out in Labour's plan to deal with this issue, and the headline-chasing gimmicks and empty gestures that are symbolised by this Rwanda policy. Politics is about choices. The government's taken its choice and we have taken ours. So in this spirit, Lord's Amendment 1B is a Labour frontbench amendment which places a responsibility on the government to have due regard for its current obligations under domestic and international law. Lord's Amendments 3B and 3C, in the name of the noble Lord Hope, together state that Rwanda may only be considered to be a safe country if and when the measures set out in the Rwanda Treaty have been fully implemented and when the Monitoring Committee has established that this is the case. The government claims that the measures in the treaty address concerns in the Supreme Court's recent unanimous ruling. So there is absolutely no reason why ministers should refuse to accept Lord Hope's amendments. Finally, Lord's Amendment 6B, in the name of the noble Baroness Chakrabarti, allows government ministers, officials and courts to consider whether Rwanda is safe on a case-by-case basis. Given that the government has accepted that some appeals will be allowed, we see no reason for the government to reject this amendment. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that colleagues across this House will join me and these benches in voting to support all of these amendments this evening. But of course, these amendments are no more than an exercise in damage limitation, because the fundamental problem is that this harebrained Rwanda policy is breaking all records for being the most unworkable and the worst value for money policy in the history of the Home Office. But there is an alternative, Madam Deputy Speaker. In addition to our policy to go after criminal smuggler gangs, We will also deliver our backlog clearance plan to get asylum seekers out of expensive asylum hotels by surging decision makers and caseworkers to the Home Office and by creating a new returns and enforcement unit with 1,000 dedicated staff focused on the faster removal of those with no right to be here, including failed asylum seekers and foreign criminals. Madam Deputy Speaker, the benches opposite are failing on all fronts. Despite their misleading boasts about progress, the Immigration Minister today admitted that there are still almost 300 asylum hotels in operation. They are returning 44% fewer failed asylum seekers compared to the last Labour government leaving office in 2010 and 27% fewer foreign criminals. The number of small boats crossings has gone up again year on year, January to March, and they have no plan for the 99% who cannot be sent to Rwanda. So we need Labour's plans to smash the criminal smuggler gangs, save lives in the Channel and strengthen our border security. We need Labour's plan for faster processing, the end of hotel use and the removal of people who have no right to stay in the UK. And we need a Labour government to deliver a firm, fair and well-managed asylum system that works for Britain. Thank you.